Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Nick Davenport, aka Mr. Mental Muscle, and we're here today with today's Mental Muscle Talk. Now, I'm here at Allo Studios. I'm here doing some work in Beverly Hills, doing some applied psychology, some training, things of that nature. And they have this studio here, and I said, why not use it for today's episode? It's a great setup, great place. I definitely recommend. Now, today's talk, we're going to get into something interesting, but let's start off with a song. That's right, a song. I'm not going to sing, so calm down. I'm not that great of a singer. But let's talk about a guy named Dino Fakaris. Now you're probably thinking, who is this? Well, does the song I Will Survive ring a bell? So basically, let's talk about Dino. Dino got fired from Motown Records, one of the biggest record labels in music history back in the mid 1970s. Now, you could be pretty down on your luck when you lose your job, right? Especially when you come from a big company. He was a producer, songwriter. So he might have been down on his luck. Now, getting into the music business is not that easy. I have brothers who both in the music business. I personally had a brief career trying to get into the music business. So it's a lot to it and it's hard to get into. But Dino said, I'm not going to give up that easy. He was inspired when he saw the theme song to one of the songs he wrote on a movie. And he said, this is a sign that I need to keep trying. So in that moment, he said, I will survive. And he ended up writing a song called I Will Survive. There you go. Now, if you're not familiar with the song, it would then go on to be given to Gloria Gaynor, but it wasn't that simple because it was a disco record. It was on its way out. It was the late 1970s, 1978 to be exact. And people were like, hey, I don't really know about this record. So he got a chance to write another song, produce another song for Gloria. But then he said on the condition that I Will Survive could be the B-side track, meaning the not single, but it's also included with the single song he made. So they said, sure. But Gloria Gaynor, she loved it because she had recently been recovering from falling on stage and hurting her back. So when she sang the song, I Will Survive, it was coming from true conviction. Because if you know the song, it's about overcoming heartbreak, overcoming struggle, trying to love again, trying to live again. So she basically felt it in her soul from her real life, trying to survive and get back to the stage, but also in the song. But if I go to the rest of the story, that song would end up becoming a Grammy Award winning song, platinum in numerous countries. It's a legendary song, been covered dozens of times, and it actually was pretty much the launch pad for Dino to do other hit songs like Peaches and Herb. So if you know those songs, you know this is a big deal. So given all this information, the moral of the story is don't give up on your dreams, keep being consistent, keep fighting, and you will accomplish whatever it is that you want. But wait a minute, that might be a mistake. Enter survivorship bias. Now, if you're not familiar with survivorship bias, think about a time when you might have said, oh, they just don't make houses like they used to, or furniture, or maybe you talk about the story of someone who overcame the biggest obstacles and survived and made it to become successful. These are examples of survivorship bias because you're giving the end result of the people who made it or survived, but you're not talking about the things that didn't make it or the people that failed or struggled or even didn't even get a chance to be successful for whatever reasons, whether it be a screw up or they just got stopped when they were this close. So that's where the bias comes in. And when we talk about cognitive biases, this can mess up how we process information and skew our perception when it comes to the training of our brain. We don't want to make misjudgments, but we can do this easily every day. And survivorship bias is just one of many that can do this. Now, where does this term even come from? Now, let's go back to World War II. Yes, I'm all over today with the history, but I used to be a history teacher, so you can see where I'm going with this. So World War II, there was a mathematician named Abraham Wald. He was working at Columbia University with other mathematicians trying to figure out a way to be able to save the destruction of the airplane bombers. Now you're thinking like math, airplanes, bombers, war. This is a whole new field, right, of applied mathematics. That's why I love applied psychology, right? You can use the science to make things happen. But basically their job was to see where they needed to place armor on these planes so they can use it, because you don't want to use too much armor to weigh the planes down because they need to be able to stay in the air. So they said, where should we put the armor? So they basically calculated like, okay, we're seeing a lot of bullet holes on the wings. So let's put the armor there. But Abraham was like, hold up, we're missing something here. These are all the planes that made it back to us. So if they were shot up at the wings and still could get back, you could argue that, do the wings really need to be as protected? Think about the planes that didn't come back. And this were survivorship, the planes who didn't survive. You could assume that they must have got shot maybe in the cockpit or the engine, the propeller. So think about that. If you can protect the parts that aren't coming back. So that must be where it's going. Because if your engine goes out, you're done for. So we can assume that bullet holes in the wings wasn't the worst thing. Obviously, you don't want that, but they were able to make it back most of the time. So this outcome that he saw laid the foundation for survivorship bias, which could be put on to other things. Now, think about how this could be utilized in your everyday life. It kind of makes you overly optimistic, right? Like I said, people say things like they don't make homes like they used to anymore. One of the biggest things I hear people say is like how the pyramids or the ruins in Greece are still standing, but we're only seeing the pyramids or the ruins that survived, right? They're called ruins, right? But we're only seeing the structures that survive. So you can assume are the Egyptians or Romans great architects? Or we're just seeing what made it over thousands of years, because guess what? They had whole civilizations and we're not seeing a lot of that architecture. So is it that modern homes or furniture are worse? We just have this nostalgic feeling of how things used to be because you see some things that lasted from the 1890s that still stand today, but most homes from the 1890s aren't still here. So you see how people can be overly optimistic on the belief of how something can last based on what's going on now, and that's a misjudgment. Think about another situation like, let's say, college dropouts. One thing I heard a lot of people say when starting a business, right? Look at Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. They dropped out of college and look how they became billionaires. They all became billionaires. But you can use the logic of, okay, those are three examples of college dropouts who made it and became billionaires. But what about all the college dropouts who end up working dead end jobs or working a job where they hate or they just don't make it in life? We don't talk about those stories. And it's safe to say that even if Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg or any of them dropped out of college, they already had the mindset to become what they did, make Facebook, make Windows or Apple. So it wasn't the fact that they dropped out of college so they can focus on the career and overcame the obstacles. They already had that mindset. But if you tell that to a person starting a business, for example, it's skewing the perception of, oh, if I just go try this and just be consistent, work hard, I'm going to make it. And I do this a lot in my mental coaching and consulting, that sometimes you got to think like, no, it isn't for everybody. I'm not trying to be a downer, but there's a lot of steps and factors and not say luck, but opportunities that come along that not everyone gets. So you got to factor that in too, because we're going back to the business example. Most businesses fail after 5 years. It's not because they didn't try hard. It's safe to say most people try hard when they work their jobs or their businesses, but things happen and most of them fail, and most of them aren't becoming millionaires or even billionaires. Obviously, if you're not becoming a millionaire, you're probably not become a billionaire. So this over optimism skews us and think we can just take on these endeavors because you're not going to necessarily be the next Mark Zuckerberg. Or you talk about how certain famous actors, celebrities slept in the car for months until they got their big break. We don't talk about the people who slept in the car for months and went to Hollywood. Like I said, I'm here in Beverly Hills, Hollywood area, who never became a star. They're just living everyday life, and that's fine. But we got to tell those stories. So this segues perfectly to the next point: is it leaves out the unheard voices. Because if we're only talking about who won, it's safe to say my job as a mental coach, if I just say work hard, do your best, and it'll come with consistency, I will be doing my clients a disservice. So that's the problem. So we need to talk about the people who didn't succeed, because you can gain a lot from the person who failed. You seem to say, why would I want to listen to a loser? I would argue you might get some better advice from the person who failed, because they're going to give you the things not to do, the things that they did along the way that they were so close, but they made this fatal mistake that ruined everything. Because guess what? The successful ones, while they still probably have struggles, I'm sure, yes, but they're not going to have that struggle or that story to give you the insight. Like if we talk to Michael Jordan, he might just say like, Nike, just do it. Dunk, shoot good, work hard, do your best, grow to be 6'6". You see how that goes? But the person who didn't make it in the NBA that was just as good as Jordan, but made some mistakes, you see where I'm going with this? They're going to have that problem because they're going to be able to tell you, hey, don't do this. This is the mistakes that could deter you. These are the investments I made that messed me up. This is the choices that I did that ruined the whole plan. So it leaves out those little voices. And the last part I'll say how it could affect you is it might think causation versus correlation. So if you have a cause and effect relationship to think that if I just go hard, work my best, and overcome the obstacles, I'll make it. That's not the cause. It's correlation because it did happen. And I would say that there's a big correlation with people who work hard and consistent and people who are successful. But why aren't everyone successful? Not everyone's a winner. Not everyone's a millionaire. Not everyone's even a big business making six figures or whatever number these days due to inflation is good. It comes down to the fact that you cannot predict the outcome simply by hearing the successful stories that made it. So you need to think wisely when you make a decision when it comes to overcoming the obstacles or overcoming the odds, because not everyone who made it, who is successful, can always give you the full story. Some people withhold things because who wants to go to a motivational speaker who only gives negative outcomes? Obviously, they're going to give their story of how they overcame, but there's some information that is not being shown in most cases when people give it. It's usually a little bit of confirmation bias because we tend to go with the things that we already believe in. So why would we push the things that aren't really on the side of where we're at? And a lot of people just don't want to think negative. In my practice, I like to push the negatives, not to say you stay there. I'm big on addressing them, acknowledging the negative, but never stay there, because once you got the negative, you can get out of the cycle of your own survivorship bias, because you can think about all the times you did things wrong, you can think about all the times you did things right, but there has to be a fair balance for you to achieve what you need to do. So the best way to overcome survivorship bias is to basically ask what's missing. I know that sounds kind of like counterproductive, like I'm looking for something that's not there. I would say yes, because if you don't see the data or the information of, if you start a business, I'll use that example again of 95% of business fail in the first 3 to 5 years. If you only look at this business in the chosen field that you're in, made it. Or if you're a football player trying to make it to the NFL, do you look at the odds? Because you can see, oh, a guy from my neighborhood, and I'm from South Florida, where a lot of talent comes from. Literally, I think the top schools that produce NFL players, I can say out of the top 10, I believe like 5 of them are in South Florida. Not just Florida, South Florida, region I grew up in. So if I said, I know 40 people in the NFL that I either played against or with, which I do, should I say then making the NFL is easy? No, I'm only seeing the stats of the people who made it, right? So what about the people who worked hard, went to practice every day, listened to the coach, ate good, worked out, got recruited, went to a D1 college even, and didn't get drafted? What about those guys? What story are they telling? So it'd be kind of, I want to say naive to think that it's automatically just do the hard work and you get there, because based off that statistic of where I come from, anyone can make the NFL. But the true statistics are that only about 1% of high school players are going to go to college level, and only about a 0.05% are going to make it to NFL. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of people when there's only about 200 slots or so in the free agency per year. So you're not talking about a lot of odds given the actual parameters of who can make it to NFL. And like I said, I'm just using sport because it's very relatable, but this can go for anything. People will become lawyers, doctors. The statistics might be higher or lower depending on what you're trying to do, but you need to take that into consideration. Even with, like, say, relationships. Some people give the, oh, I know this person who they waited and waited, and then they bumped into the person they loved at the grocery store, and they became married, had 10 kids, and lived happily ever after. Guess what? Waiting might not be the best option to find your ideal relationship. I see a lot of people, they'll say, I'm waiting for my guy to come, or my girl, my person, whatever, and it's going to be the right time, the right person. Name one thing in life that you just wait for. But if you go off the eyes of, oh, that one story, the causation, wait for the person, and then you'll get it, then you're probably succumbing to survivorship bias. So look at what's not there. So that's the main takeaway. So think back to the next time you hear the song, I Will Survive. Remember this little history lesson I gave you. But remember, if you are surviving, check out the people who didn't. That's the best way that you can get your mind right. Thanks once again, as always, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.